My name is James Lindsay. I am an expert in critical race theory. In fact, I'm one of the very few experts in critical race theory that does not subscribe to the ideology underlying critical race theory. And I wanted to testify in support of this bill. I think this bill is a crucial maneuver for essentially every state, especially since there was an executive order of this type federally that then was rescinded by the current sitting president. I want to kind of start my testimony. I'll try to stay brief by saying that I receive thousands of messages from people all over the country because I am recognized as a kind of world level expert in critical race theory, from parents of students in schools, people in workplaces, begging me for solutions that they can bring to their workplaces, to their children's schools, to try to deal with the problems that follow from this ideology. A lot of people don't understand critical race theory, and we can talk about that briefly in a moment, but I want to talk about the bill itself first, as it's modeled after the executive order that President Trump issued in September. And it doesn't even technically ban critical race theory. It certainly doesn't ban the teaching of critical race theory. It certainly doesn't ban diversity or anti-racist or racial sensitivity training, and people should be clear about that. So it's not shutting down the ability to have diversity training or education or to cover these subjects in an academic manner in school. So it should be made clear. On the other hand, it does ban things that are central to the United States. It bans, or central to, the opposite of them is central to the United States. It bans racial scapegoating. It bans racial stereotyping. It bans racial discrimination. It bans naming the country or state, in this case, as being intrinsically evil or racist or sexist. It bans the same things for sex and race, racial scapegoating, sex scapegoating, racial stereotyping, sex stereotyping, and discrimination for both. These are not things that we really want to try to bring back into this country. We spent a long time getting away from them. The ideology of critical race theory begins from the first assumption that it makes. This is written in all of their literature. You can read it for yourself, for example, in Delgado and Stefanchik's Critical Race Theory and Introduction, which is a standard textbook in the subject. It says that it begins from the assumption that racism, and it would be parallel for sexism, is the ordinary state of affairs in society. It is the normal science of society. It's not an aberration. That boils down, in the name or in the words of other scholars, to the question is no longer did racism take place, but rather how did racism manifest in that situation? The people who are equipped to find the racism that's apparently hidden in every possible situation, every interaction, every student-teacher interaction, every employee interaction, every boss-employee interaction, every single one of those has racism in it. The people equipped to find it are called critical race theorists. What this training, or what this bill is supposed to ban, is training people to think this way, and mandating them in their workplaces and in their schools to have to think this way. This is a divisive, dangerous way to reintroduce race salience and sex salience into our institutions. It's from the thousands of messages I receive from panicked parents and employees all over the country all the time. It causes division. It causes hostile working and learning environments. It will set schools and workplaces up for lawsuits where they have created discrimination and they have created hostile working environments. And it's virtually certain also that it will open the door to the people that are providing these trainings for being sued for providing a fraudulent product that does not provide what it claims to provide. There are already attorneys general in some states looking into how to do that because the evidence is opposite of what these training materials say that they do. So in that regard, I'll wrap up. I think that this is a very dangerous situation that we find ourselves in the United States and in the state of New Hampshire right now. And I think that it is in the best interest of every state possible to make a stand on this and say, no, we are not going to reintroduce race and sex scapegoating, stereotyping, discrimination, or billing our nation or states or institutions as intrinsically evil, racist, or sexist. So I have to support this bill as I supported the executive order that President Trump issued in September. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Representative Pearson.
Thank you for taking, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Historically, worldwide, has there ever been a nation that has taught critical race theory to its people, and has there And if so, what were the effects of that, if you're aware of any?
Thank you for your question. The answer to that question is no. Critical race theory began in the 1970s, but it really was developed in the 1990s and has only come to prominence in the last decade. And it is almost a wholly American invention. It was developed at Harvard Law by Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw, who you can check out their scholarship if you want for yourself. And the closest parallel to what critical race theory teaches and preaches that's been installed at the governmental level is the government of South Africa. You've seen, if you want, you can look up the equity task force that Governor Inslee of Washington installed in about a year ago, a little over a year ago in the state of Washington. And they have an entire section in which they speak that part of the goal of their task force, which is using the same ideology, is to move the government of Washington in the direction of the government of South Africa. So if you can look at what's going on in South Africa right now and think this is the direction that for my state, this is the direction for the United States, that's the closest parallel that you'll find. But critical race theory is an American invention. It's quite new, and it has not yet been installed, except that it has kind of taken over in places in the United States over the past, 8 months or so, pretty significantly, leading to President Trump issuing that order.
Thank you. Representative Schultz, you had a question?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I think I know who you are. Are you the same James Lindsay that is on Twitter as @ConceptualJames?
Yes, that's me.
Okay. Madam Chair, I know that this is going to be a difficult question, but I'm asking it since he claims to be a national expert and mean no offense to the committee in my question. But Mr. Lindsay, isn't it true that you have been, examined as someone who has issued death threats against the Jewish community and prominent Jewish activists?
That is not relevant to this bill. And
I'll speak to that because it's false, and my name is Dr. Lindsay, if you don't mind.
And you're a math professor, correct? Not a sociology professor?
I am a PhD in mathematics who's been studying the relevant academic literature full-time, 16 hours a day, most days of the week for the past 3 years.
And isn't it true you're affiliated with a national white?
Representative Schultz, I've muted you. That
The
question.
answer to that question is also no. I am affiliated with absolutely nothing of the sort. I can name the organization she's probably trying to insinuate bad things about to try to impugn my motives, but that organization is neither white nor nationalist. It's in fact run by a half Cuban and half of its board is Asian.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just want to say that because many of the proponents of this bill are claiming that those who oppose this are racist, isn't it important to understand, since this is all ideologically driven, if someone is actually affiliated with a group that is believed to be by the Southern Poverty Law Center a white supremacist group?
Representative Schultz, not necessarily, and I think we will not. I do not believe that either the supporters or the proponents of this bill are racist, and I would not make that assumption. Thank you very much.
May I have one moment to say something about that because it is germane?
It's germane.
Yes, so it is important to understand that one of the beliefs of critical race theory is that all criticism of critical race theory comes from a place of racism or white supremacy, whether that's intentional or unintentional. When it's unintentional, they call it willful ignorance. They suggest, and I can give you a list of citations a mile long. We could talk about Barbara Applebaum's being white being good. We could talk about Robin DiAngelo's white fragility. We could talk about Allison Bailey's paper about privilege preserving epistemic pushback. The belief in critical race theory is that any disagreement with critical race theory must come from motives that wish to support white supremacy and racism. And in fact, they say that people who benefit from that by virtue of the color of their skin or because they are selling out if their race is other than, say, white or what they term white adjacent, have have little motivation to disrupt their own racial comfort. That's their words. And therefore have strong motivation to oppose critical race theory for self-beneficial, ultimately racist reasons that help to uphold that alleged racist white supremacy system that they claim is the ordinary operating system of society. So it's very important to understand that it's impossible to disagree with critical race theory without being accused of being a racist or a white supremacist. And you get used to it after a while.
Thank you.
My name is Dr. Karlyn Borysenko. I'm an organizational psychologist and I live in Merrimack, New Hampshire. I'm testifying today in strong support of HB 544. After last week's hearing, Representative Chris Schultz tweeted the following: "A bunch of racists in New Hampshire are promoting a racist bill that says we should stop pointing out how dank white supremacy is." She also publicly insinuated that anyone who disagrees with her...
Ms. Dr. Borysenko, I've muted you. Please do not attack members of the committee. Do not impugn their motives. Thank you.
She can send us copies of that tweet, though, if she wants.
What's that?
She can send us copies of that tweet by email if she
That's
wants.
fine. Thank you.
I'd be happy to.
I'm not sure if I was off mute there, but I will say I'm not impugning her motives. I am saying that she has made public statements in this regard, and I'm bringing it up to articulate that nothing is further from the truth about this bill. Those are lies. This bill opposes racism. It does precisely the opposite of what people like Representative Schultz are trying to get you to believe. Now, you just heard from Dr. Lindsay, so I won't repeat what he said about critical race theory, but I have been working nonstop to understand this ideology and its impact on organizations and individuals for the last 2 years. And here are the conclusions that I've come to. Critical race theory is dangerous and toxic. It teaches people to hate themselves and inflicts tremendous pain and guilt for things they are not responsible for. Let me be really blunt. Critical race theory teaches people that if you were born white, you are inherently racist. And yes, Representative Schultz, that even includes you. The best-selling book, White Fragility, is one of the Bibles of critical race theory. And in it, author Robin DiAngelo, herself a white woman, confesses that she has been racist since the womb, has been racist her entire life, and will always be a racist simply because she is born white. It is not a question of if you are a racist, it is assumed. And the only question is how your racism manifests. HB 544 would specifically ban these ideas from entering into state agencies and state contractors under the guise of diversity training. Now, I'm an organizational psychologist. I do corporate training for a living. Not all diversity training is based on critical race theory. There are wonderful diversity training programs out there that have nothing to do with this ideology and would not be impacted by this bill. The Democrats who are telling people that this bill would ban diversity training are lying to you. The bill only addresses trainings that teach people they are racist because of how they were born. Let me tell you how this training manifests in organizations. They start off by segregating the white employees from all of the non-white employees. Yes, under critical race theory, segregation is a good thing. Then they make the white employees confess to their racism and sometimes even write letters of apology to non-white employees, even if their behavior has not been racist in any way. Remember, their racism is assumed because of how they were born. And if the white employees push back or refuse, or even if they just ask questions about why their organization is making them admit that they're racist, they are in very real danger of losing their jobs. So that is the choice when this training comes into organizations. You either confess that you're a racist or you lose your job. That's bad enough. But let me give you evidence and a highly practical reason to support this bill. There is absolutely no evidence that training based on critical race theory is effective. None, zero, zilch. And I know, I've looked. As an organizational psychologist, if something is effective in the work...
Thank you, Ms. Borysenko. I think we've gotten your testimony. Do you have a few seconds of highlights that you want to add?
Well, I think that there is one more thing in that you are going to hear no testimony today that says this training is effective. And as a New Hampshire state resident, if my tax dollars are being spent on something, I want to know that it's actually effective. So critical race theory creates more racism, not less. It is not going to make organizations fairer, more open, more diverse, or any of those things. It's going to do exactly the opposite. So I strongly encourage everyone to support this bill and protect the people of New Hampshire from this harmful ideology.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, I wasn't going to address the comments she directed at me. I did have a genuine question.
Yes, if it's a question, ask it.
Since this bill also addresses gender and, gender, I just wanted to see if you're the same Karlyn Borysenko who wrote the article in Forbes magazine about the gender pay gap.
Yes, absolutely, I am. The gender pay gap is a myth, and I am Dr. Borysenko. Thank you.
I'd like to speak on behalf of, in support of this bill, rather. If you look at the language in the bill, it's quite clear. All it does is say that you can not stereotype, scapegoat, or demean individuals on the basis of race and sex. This is the basic moral takeaway of the 14th Amendment and of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Critical race theory, as it's implemented in institutions, actually does all of those things. It stereotypes, scapegoats, and demeans. It traffics in notions of race essentialism. It promotes harmful and divisive stereotypes based on inborn characteristics. It also creates a hostile working environment and would put the state at risk of legal action. And finally, I think that it's very clear that these are also violations in many cases of the Civil Rights Act. I'm the director of the Center on Wealth and Poverty at Discovery Institute. I'm a contributing editor at City Journal magazine and a visiting fellow this year at the Heritage Foundation. I've studied critical race theory. I've done the investigative reporting, and I'd like to just share a few examples of what happens in the real world as these programs are implemented that this bill seeks to prevent. I reported on the Sandia National Laboratories, which designs and produces the nuclear weapons arsenal of the United States government. They recently took white male executives and then forced them in a training session to deconstruct their white male identity. It said that being a white male is analogous to the KKK, to white supremacists, and to lynching, and then forced them to apologize for their inborn traits and write letters of apology and in the abstract to women and people of color for the way that they were born. In education, these programs are deeply harmful. I've reported on recently a story where first graders in California were forced to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities and then rank themselves according to their power and privilege, telling some first graders that they were the oppressors and some first graders that they were the oppressed. I've also reported on a story recently in New York City where a public middle and high school sent an email to white parents telling them that they had to do white identity work and that the highest goal as a white person should be to become a, quote, white traitor and eventually advocate for, quote, white abolition. This is language that applied to any other group would be considered a euphemism for elimination. This kind of rhetoric is deeply divisive. It hurts people. And finally, it's actually in practice deeply condescending and patronizing towards people of color. Critical race theory argues in many training sessions that I've documented and reported on that traits of rationalism, individuality, logic, and punctuality are manifestations of white supremacy, implying that African Americans and Latinos, Asians, and Native Americans are somehow not able to exhibit the qualities of rationality or punctuality or even logic. This kind of ideology is deeply corrosive at its core. It's fundamentally racist. And again, the language of this bill says you cannot be racist or sexist. You cannot degrade, demean, or stereotype people on the basis of race or sex. Anyone who votes for this bill would be basically saying that we support and will allow racism and sexism to proliferate through the institutions. It's a very simple moral question. Don't be kind of taken astray by the very verbose academic language of some of my opponents supporting or opposing this bill. It's very simple. Look what happens in practice, and please stand up for the right thing in defense of civil rights in defense of logic and rationality, and in defense of treating people equally, no matter how they were born.
Thank you, committee members. My name is Lilly Tang Williams, and I live in Ware, New Hampshire, and I represent myself as a former Chinese immigrant from the People's Republic of China. I was born and grew up in China. Before I came to this country, I was an assistant law school professor in Shanghai. I decided to fly China for America, not go to Europe, because I truly believed our founding fathers document the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. I first landed in Austin, Texas, when I was about 24 years old, without speaking much English. And I live in a white neighborhood, 98% white. And I went to graduate school in UT Austin, also mostly white. And I can tell you about my personal experience. Everybody was so nice and welcoming. They helped me to adapt to a new country. And they offered me the free rides to go to grocery stores because I was very poor. I only borrowed $100 to come to this country. And they donated clothing, cooking stuff, household items to me, including blankets and sheets. See, my English was very poor. My classmates were very nice to me and offered me to borrow their notes and help me with school project. I also met my future husband the first night in Austin, Texas. And later we married after dating for 2 years. His entire family members were white. They welcomed me and with the warmth and with trust. Actually, they just loved me. And I feel so blessed, of course, to have a family in America because I come here alone. I did not have anybody, any family and friends were close to me. And so I, be honest with you, we raised 3 race children, mixed race children. And I lived in America now for a total of 88, so 32 years. I have never experienced the discrimination due to my skin color or my race, except one incident. It was a road rage insult comment from a lady. Of course, I stood up for myself and she was gone. And I'm living American dream today. Consider my humble past from a totalitarian country. And I love this country. I strongly reject critical race theory. I'm here to support this bill because this critical race theory is infecting our country now for years. I learned about history of American slavery. I also learned history about discrimination against Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans. And I loved Dr. King, whose famous speech, "I have a dream." And since the civil rights movement, America has come a long way. I remember that so many actually people of the color today got elected into government offices and own homes, have businesses, and I have lots of friends also from all walks of life. I do not agree America is a systemic racist country. Otherwise, why would the millions immigrants want to come to this country and have come to this country from all over the world to better their lives? They wanted to come here to achieve American dream. Critical race theory is based on skin color and race, pure and simple. It creates hatred. It creates division that our country really don't need right now. I think it's the tool to be used by the radical left to divide and conquer. I grew up during the reign of Mao, the dictator you should all know, right? I hope so. And experienced his entire 10 years cultural revolution with my own eyes. I was a little child. Let me tell you, this racist theory It's a technique similar to what happened to us during the Mao's regime. It separates citizens into two big giant groups, victims who are oppressed, and oppressors are the white people, especially white males that I happen to marry to one. And let me also express, I was terrified because I remember Mao used getting rid of whole, like destroy the full old campaign to basically to use the young Red Guards to achieve absolute power. He became a god during the Cultural Revolution control. His regime controlled 1.3 billion human lives. And he divided the citizens into 10 classes, 5 red, like me, red child from a workers class, and the 5 blacks. You can easily find out what they are. I don't want to get into specific those 10 classes here, but he urged the Red Guards, those people who worship him, who were young, I live, and who did not know the history, to publicly shame, and the black classes people have to come out to kowtow, to basically denounce themselves, so-called their blackness instead of whiteness. And they also beat them up if they don't do criticize correctly. When I saw what happened last summer in our country, months and months of riots and looting and the public shaming people, if you don't join the new movement, some people might support the Black Lives Movement. But
stop for a second, please. Could you please wrap it up? I want to keep everyone's testimony equal, and you've had quite an amount of time. I find the testimony fascinating. Could listen to it all day, but I want to be fair.
You have to unmute again.
Thank you. So I wanted to just testify that I witnessed 10 years cultural revolution. I don't really want that happen to our country because America is a home. We have no place to go. If we lose America as a free country, we can deal with individual cases of racism and the police brutality, but we have so much in common. As American citizens, we love this country. We want to have the best for our kids and our future. So please support this bill, and this bill is going to, I think, not silence the another side. We can still have discussions and conversations, but you don't use taxpayers' money to support critical theory. Thank you very much.
Gabrielle Clark, and I have been exposed to critical race theory in my family, and I'll tell you about what happened with my son. My son his name is William Martin Clark. His middle name is Martin because he was born on Martin Luther King Day of that year. And earlier this year, he was asked to complete a project in his class where he had to list his identities, his racial identity, his religion, his sexual identity, all of those things. And because he refused, he was retaliated against. He suffered some serious emotional distress, as have I, because he refused to be categorized as an oppressor since he is a straight white male. Since he is a straight white male, they have decided for him that he's an oppressor and he is privileged. When this boy, his father died when he was 1 year old. When this all happened, we were living in a motel and William was sleeping on a mat on the floor. There's nothing privileged about my son's life. And just because he's a straight white male doesn't give anybody the right to make that decision and that distinction and that determination. That is what critical race theory does. And if you don't root this out right now, you will be suffering this same thing in your schools, in your jobs, and everywhere else. It is a poison. and you need to get rid of it. You can teach racial equality, and you can even decide that racial equity is something that you want to pursue without critical race theory as the basis for doing it. You want racial equality, you want racial equity, teach the kids math, teach the kids English, make sure they get good jobs and they have the skills to move forward in life. You do not need this nonsense. It is corrosive, it is disgusting, you should get rid of it. And I am a person of color, and I am saying this. All my life, I have been able to make my own decisions and take care of my own self. And whenever I needed to, I got help. Because this is America. And if you need help, you get help. If you're being discriminated against, you file a complaint, or you file a lawsuit, or you do something about it. You do not need other people to tell you how you should or should not think, or what you should or should not do. That is what critical race theory does, and it is gross.